In our previous videos, we saw how to do a low-level network call to get string data back from a certain URI, and then we saw how to use JSON object and JSON array to parse JSON data into some data that we could use, some name-value pair data, and then take that data and use it to populate a series of Java objects. In this video, we're going to take a look at Retrofit, which is a library that essentially does all of the above. The question you might have is, why did we just go through all of it one way if we're now going to look at it a different way? Well, Retrofit makes your life a lot easier than doing every step independently, but to understand what Retrofit does, you kind of have to have an understanding of what's going on under the covers. So both options, the one I showed earlier with getting the raw data and parsing it, and Retrofit, both options are good options, and really which one to use is a lot of it is up to personal opinion. So it automates a lot of the otherwise manual tasks, and to use Retrofit we need to add this Maven dependency here, which I'll do so in just one moment. One important thing about Retrofit is that it is essentially taking a look at our JSON data and automatically pushing it into a series of DTOs. That means we have to have a series of DTOs that look like the JSON data that we're getting back in response. Now that probably seems pretty straightforward if you're looking at a JSON stream like this where you see a whole bunch of objects that are the same. But one thing to consider is that we also have an object here, as you can see by the open curly, and that object owns a collection of plants. So there are actually two DTOs that we need to make here. There's one DTO that represents every single plant, and then there's another DTO that represents the entire collection of plants. Or in other words, an object that holds this entire collection of plants. So let's get started. First, I'll go ahead and grab this dependency for Maven, and we know how this works. We put it right into our POM, and just a little bit of tidying up here, and we save. Whoops. And just to be safe, right-click and do a Maven update, so it goes out and it grabs those dependencies, just like so, and OK. Now from here, I'm going to go to our plant DAO. And I can see that it's currently kind of doing a manual process to go out and fetch the data that we have here. We want to have Retrofit do this instead. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to repurpose this fetch method. We'll call it fetch manual, and then I will redo the fetch method so that we can take a look at how to do it in a Retrofit style. So add unimplemented methods will make this one fairly straightforward, and here's our fetch method that we have now. Now we have to run up and take the override annotation off the fetch manual method. The override annotation indicates that this method is listed in an interface or superclass, which it's not because we just made it up. So just a little bit of housekeeping there. Okay, now the fetch method. For the fetch method, we're going to use this to coordinate a lot of our retrofitting. So I'm going to say retrofit equals new retrofit dot builder, just like so. And then, don't need a semicolon, sorry, don't need a semicolon there. But let's see if we can import this retrofit here. So Control 1 and import retrofit, just like so. And okay, we got that taken care of. Now a few more things that we need to do here. We need to say .base URL. Whoop, there we go. And we will grab, let's just use the URL here that we were using to the base URL of our JSON stream. So it's going to essentially be http plantplaces.com, just like so. And we'll put that in quotes. Okay. And then we need to say .build, just like so. More to come here, but not just yet. We're just getting things started, and at this point we've confirmed that we did properly import the Retrofit Maven dependency because we see it was able to resolve our import. Okay, what's next? So let's take a look at our stream of data and right-click and choose copy here. And what we need to do is we need to make some objects that essentially look like this data or are able to receive this data. Now there's a shortcut that we can use. There's a site called JSON Schema to POJO, And what that will do is you can put in a JSON schema and it says, oh, okay, here are the objects that you're going to require to parse out the data. So I put in the data here, probably more than I need because I don't need to list every single quote. But let's go ahead and say target language Java. We'll say JSON, and we're going to use the JSON annotation style because that's what Retrofit uses. Let's go ahead and preview this. And what we're going to see is a couple different things. First of all, here's this thing called example. This thing called example contains a list of plants. This is important. This is one of the reasons why I wanted to take a look at this, is you need an object that is, here, I'll tell you what, we'll do it like so. JSON viewer, stack.hu. Oh, actually, we already have that up, don't we? We need an object that is going to hold this array of plants here. So we need kind of like a meta object, or kind of like an Uber object, an object that's going to hold this set of plants. If we take a look at what it came up with, it called it example. We can call ours plant list, but essentially the guts are going to be the same as what you see here. Now underneath that, you see there's a class called plant. And this class called plant probably looks fairly familiar. ID, genus, species, cultivar, and common, but note there are some annotations, serialized name, and expose. Aside from that, this lower plant.java thing that it created here looks exactly like our existing plant DTO. So I'll tell you what, let's start with that one just because we already have that one started, and all we really need to do is change or add these annotations to the place where we're declaring our variables. So actually this might be fairly straightforward. I'll just right click and choose copy, and I'll go back to our DTO, and I'm just going to do a quick boom, replace, and of course I will need to solve for serialized name. Now you notice it's not giving me an option to import, so a quick search turns up a Maven dependency that I require, this com.google.code.json, Maven dependency that I require to get those annotations. So let's go ahead and take care of that dependency, and we will just a moment, we will go to our POM. And one more dependency to add. This is why POMs are quite nice, because it saves a lot of what used to be a lot of manually fiddling around that we just don't need to do anymore. Save, back to our plant DTO, and click, and now take a look. Import serialized name is available, and import expose is available. So with a little bit of advice from that site that we were looking at, the JSON to POJO site, with a little bit of advice, we were able to take our existing plant DTO and simply add some annotations to it that will help out with this process. I did notice one small copy and paste error. It generated a private string ID. We want this to be an int GUID instead, but note that that's why we have the serialized name, because it's essentially mapping the JSON's name to our internal variable name. In many cases, it's the same, like you see here, genus and genus, species and species, cultivar and cultivar. But in the case that it's different, that's okay. You just put the JSON name here and then whatever your variable name is here, and everything matches up fine. So that one's pretty straightforward. If we go back, let's take a look at this one called example, and we are going to need to model this class as well. We won't call it example though, we'll call it plant list. And remember, this is kind of a higher level concept that just contains everything underneath it. So I right click and I say new, and we'll say Java class, and we'll call this one plant list, and finish. And inside of plant list, paste, and a little bit of Control-Shift-O magic to automatically do our import, so Java util list, and just about everything should be okay. One thing, we need to make that a plant DTO, not just a plant DTO, just like so, and plant DTO. And I think, well, let's see, it looks like we have just about everything that we need. So I'm going to go ahead and choose save. So plant list and plant DTO. And those are our two data objects. We know that the plant DTO, the plant DAO class that we've created is going to go in and call our retrofit builder. But there's one more thing we need to do. We need to kind of give retrofit some instruction to say, hey, call this stream. And when you call the stream, marshal everything into this plant list concept here. Now this is kind of weird. But for this, what we're going to do is we're going to create an interface, and we'll create it in our DAO layer. So I'm going to right-click and say New Interface, and we're going to call this Get Plant DAO. Or we'll call it Get. We'll just call it Get Plants. You know what? We'll just call it Get Plants because it's kind of an interesting being. So interface Get Plants, and now what we're going to do is make a method called call, and then we'll say plant list, and then get all plants, like so, and terminate with the semicolon. Okay, Control-Shift-O to organize imports. We want retrofit to call, just like so. And then it figured out plant list for us. So this is essentially the method that retrofit's going to use to go down, call out, get our JSON stream, and then return back a plant list. And remember what a plant list is. That's the object that we just made that contains a list of plant DTOs. If all works well, this plant list will be populated when we do this call. Let's look at it in high definition. Now, I need to add an annotation here as well. I need to say @get, and then I need to add an endpoint. You might recall in our DAO, we started with a base URL, which is plantplaces.com, so we don't need to replace that. All we need is everything that follows that. So let's do it like so. We'll grab this endpoint, and we will go to our get plants, and we say get, and then inside of the get, we place the endpoint in quotes, just like so, and save. And organize imports again, and we get retrofit, retrofit's get method. Okay, and save. Now remember this interface name called get plants, and here's the funny thing. We're done with this interface. That's all we need to do for the moment. We can make it more complicated, but we don't have to. Also, when you think of interface, you normally think we have to make a class that implements the interface. In this case, we don't have to. Retrofit will implement this interface for us under the covers. It's really a weird way it works. But nonetheless, interface is done. We need to go back and wire this up to our fetch method where we started to build out this retrofit client. So here things get really interesting once again. What we're going to do is that, remember that interface that we just made? So we'll take the interface that we just made, get plants, service, and let's just call it get plants, equals retrofit dot create get plants dot class. What we're doing here is we're telling retrofit to figure out what to do with that interface. In other words, figure out an implementation for that interface. After that, we can say get plants, and then we can invoke the method that we just created on it, which is get all plants. And what's get all plants going to return? Well, control 1 and assign statement to new local variable. It's going to return to us a plant list collection, essentially. So now all plants, and we will say execute. So we're doing this asynchronously, so essentially we're going to wait for the response. And then control 1, assign to new local variable, and that will give us our plant list. And then execute dot body. And once again, control 1. Control 1 is nice in Eclipse because if you're on a method signature, it will create a variable that will hold whatever that method returns. So assign to new local variable. And finally, we get our plant list. Okay, now with that, we can go down to the bottom and we can return plant list dot get plants. Okay, and save. It might be a good idea to go ahead and put this on a different line just so we can debug through it a little bit easier. So I'll go ahead and do that. So boom, plant list dot get plants. Once again, control 1, assign to new local variable, our list of plants. And now we can see in a very straightforward manner that we are going to return this list of all of our plants just like so, and that this list of all of our plants is a list of plant DTOs. So in this fetch method, we've done quite a bit. We created our retrofit instance, we gave it a reference to this interface, and we told retrofit under the covers to figure out its own implementation of that interface. Now we're going through, we're executing retrofit, getting some data. We're getting the parsed plants out of that, and then we're returning the parsed plants. Let's go ahead and save. One more thing that we do need to do is we need to tell it what converter factory we're using. I mentioned earlier we're using JSON syntax. So we're going to need to add one more line to this build, which is add converter factory. And then we'll say JSON converter factory.create. Now this is new. Adding this is new in Retrofit 2, which is why I didn't do it earlier. And that will essentially take something that's passed into the method and make it a query parameter, just as you see here. So I can make mine at query, and we'll say combine name, and then we'll simply call this one string combined name, just like so. That means it will automatically create that query parameter up here based on whatever's passed into this method. Let's go ahead and do an import here and save. And now let's go back to our plant DTO, terminate the debugger, or plant DAO. Notice it's broken now because it's expecting a value to be passed into this getAllPlants. Well, what value can that be? If we trace this back, we know that this fetch method in the plant DAO is called from the plant service, the specimen service rather. And you see that specimen service is currently passing in a hard-coded word called oak. Just to play around, let's make that maple. But really, we will eventually get this from the user interface anyway. We just want to confirm that we are able to parameterize it. So for getAllPlants, let's pass in search filter, which at this point should be maple because that's what I'm passing through. And we'll save. I went ahead and started the debugger. You can see that we're passing in the word maple. In F5, we're creating our retrofit instance. And I'll double click so we can see this in high definition. So it's creating retrofit now. Now onto our getPlants. Now let's confirm the search filter is indeed maple, and it is maple in F6. And execute the call. Get the response. Parse the body. And let's see what kind of plants we got back. I mouse over, and I'll expand the view of this variable as soon as I can get, oh, there we go, just have to hit the right spot there. And let's just pick one at random, and sure enough you see maple, Acer flatabellum. And if I scroll down here, Japanese maple, and sure enough, VJ Drake maple. Sure enough, every plant that I'm getting returned here is some kind of maple tree. So we'll go ahead and choose F8 and tell it to finish up. But moral of the story here is that we can use this add query annotation to take a value that's passed in, and we can automatically add it as a name value pair to this endpoint that we're calling here. So that's a look at how to use Retrofit to read and parse JSON easily. In this case, it happens to be a Spring Boot application, but the same process would work very similar in just about any Java-based application. I hope this video has been helpful, and I look forward to reading your comments. Thank you.